comparative study, or several. But to start, the South Asian culture that I've been researching does not, for the most part, practice iconoclasm in the most common primary sense that we know of it in the West. But more its opposite, iconoclasm, say idol worship, common terms. In Western culture, idol worship has been long kind of it's had a questionable reputation. And add to this that Levinas himself has insisted, Emmanuel Levinas is a famous Jewish theologian of the 20th century. He's insisted from his iconoclastic, or he's insisted that the human person is to be regarded as separate from this kind of ontological sort of orientation towards being, right? So an icon can be a thing, but a person is entirely different. An enigma, something that has to sit apart from our normal way of categorizing things, right? So it's kind of a critique of this idea of doing onto-anthropology, defining human beings in terms of kinds of being, right? And so this is a very interesting sort of issue that comes up, especially in the particular way that icons get treated in the East and the way that they're treated in the West. There's an interesting sort of difference there that we can kind of try to map and think about. Many of our modern, our postmodern values are based upon biblical teachings, and of course the particular value that I hear Levinas coming from is this idea that thou shalt not make for oneself an engraved image and of that which is in the heaven, or that which is on the earth, or that which is below the earth and the waters. So it's pretty, sort of an exhaustive sort of way of saying, no natural sort of icons, no icons of anthropomorphized deities that you find in nature, right? Don't represent the wind, the sun, the stars, or anything like that. This is a very interesting thing then to think of that as something that we've actually built Western culture upon. And so I want to look into that a little more. So, yeah, I mean, as a lover of art, and as an active iconographer, somebody who actually makes images of deities, I've always found this ethically framed commandment somewhat unsettling, to even my best artistic intentions. Even when we're talking about the intention of trying to signify the concept of infinite beauty, that just through self-disciplining oneself in the creation of the art, and through attempting to put a labor of love into the art in order to sort of talk about that, to make a statement about the idea. That's something that I think this speaks to. But we do have, outside of that sort of very strictly religious context, we do have more familiar concepts of the concept of idolatry or idol worship, just in the sense that we tend to talk of movie stars as idols, or rock stars, things like that. So I think that's also something we can look at. Anyways, so Emmanuel Levinas has done some phenomenological work in attempting to ask about ethics, and he's very much borrowed heavily from his own Jewish tradition and his community, and what he's trying to do is he's trying to distinguish what we call first-person experience of reality, which is very much Heidegger's project of the sort of what do I see, what can I describe phenomenally, what appears to me, and how does it appear to me, what are my intentional relationships to it, how does it affect my emotions, things like that. Which is almost like if you think about aesthetics, the idea of looking at or regarding a piece of art, then you can kind of see how that kind of way of regarding art could be very potentially a rich way of describing it, right? You're just asking about, well, what does it do for you? And it is kind of a popular way of talking about art today. But for him, the person has to be regarded entirely separate from this, right? When we want to ask about the ethical relationship between oneself and another, then the question of aesthetics has to be set aside to a certain extent, because it includes the nature of the person's alterity, their otherness, right? When you think of them through ontological, again, this onto-anthropology, what happens as a result is that you forget about the ethical issue. This is really interesting stuff, and I've always been wondering about how to better understand that in terms of its own relationship to the general tendency of iconoclasm, the critique that is lashed out against like a stone image. So can this idea of a person as both an image and as a question engage the question of aesthetics and ethics at once without a tension between them? Because generally they've been set up in opposition to each other. So with Kierkegaard you see the same thing. It's not exactly opposition, but it's more like inferior, superior. You get aesthetics is considered or regarded as this kind of smaller domain of existence, and then you get outside of that into the ethical domain, and it's broader. It's got a greater scope. But again, these are just different ways of talking about this relationship between aesthetics and ethics that I think are very interesting, and that speak to the concept of icons. So I'm speaking to a context where Levinas is in conversation with Heidegger, who's all about doing ontology, and even turning ontology back on the first-person experience in terms of like asking about the meaning of existence and the question of who am I and what am I, right? And ethics is of course sort of asking about the propriety of that question with respect to other people, and it's a very interesting, it's an interesting and complicated issue. But anyways, let's move on to the slides. That's my sort of preface. Now hopefully we'll start moving at a little better speed. Sorry, this is what happens when you read too much Levinas. Or Heidegger or any of these other guys. You start to get a little sluggish in the way you talk about things. It's swimming through thick molasses. Okay, so the name of the talk is, of course, Tracing the Riverbeds of Iconoclasm, and that is to say we're trying to account for difference in comparative postmodern theologies. We're trying to look at how you compare these things. So my presentation today is itself something like a damaged image. I have pieces to a puzzle, pieces that I think provide strong motivation to kind of comparative question that I want to ask. But I'm not yet entirely sure how to put it together, nor where the critical remarks belong, if to any particular site other than to the most obvious case, as will be hopefully made plain shortly. I do suspect that there are contemporary issues regarding the outcomes of iconoclastic culture that are worthy of critical response, if I have understood the history of these forces at all correctly. But this may be simply a question of extremes. Still, if even the best of intentions, such as the ethical assignment of superior status, that of a soul above the mere body, and I put mere here in quotes, but can give rise to perversions of the human spirit, as I here suggest it might, then we will need to reconsider the extent to which ethics can be regarded as basically iconoclastic in its orientation, pace Levinas. There's the question of sources. Now, I've listed here different kinds of iconoclasm, different ways we can talk about, like different ways we can categorize iconoclasm. This is not in any case a polished list, but it's provisional. It's something that I'm thinking through and trying to build a better sort of an ontological map of different kinds of iconoclasm. So each of these different modes of iconoclasm seem to be attended by distinctive dangers, and hence a problematic sort of method for asking about it needs to be developed for each distinctive kind of iconoclasm. And and there may be extensive overlap between these. So natural and ritual. You see here, natural is just time, and then ritual signifying the natural or signifying the temporal. So and then you have other forms, narrative or pedagogic, political, anti-image, striking at the face of power, metaphysical, the death of God, secularism, ethical, Levinas, criticism of onto-anthropology, aesthetic, instructing artisans, critique of art, right, by the instructor, and then there's also just the question of what else might be considered iconoclasm. So here I've traced it to a number of sources, and among these are the natural vicissitudes, time itself closely connected to the natural, and so on. Anyways, we'll just move on. I don't want to spend too much time on each of these. But so first of all, let's just talk about natural iconoclasm. That is to say, you have what ontologically might be regarded as the ecstatic vicissitudes of time. You have any object that you make, whether you make it out of stone or metal or what have you, ice, it's going to wear down in time. Nature just sort of wears it out, right? You can't keep it alive forever. And there's even a question of there's even a question of what this originally looked like, right? Like the pharaoh's face could actually itself be like a late addition to the image. It was originally maybe a lion's face or something. People speculated about these things, and I think it's an interesting question because even in the creation of an icon, there can be iconoclasm mixed in, right? The transformation of the animistic to the more anthropic. So even the creation of an icon can itself be destructive of an icon. And it's sort of an interesting sort of thought. Anyways, but in any case, we do have the nature of time such that it will always tend to wear these things out. And then you have ritual iconoclasm, which is very interesting in its own right. You have idols that are produced for a specific festival during a specific season. The deity or the sort of disembodied, great spirit is then invited to enter into the body for the sake of the ritual, but then at the end is asked to leave, and then the body is thrown into a lake. And even today, you have this very interesting sort of issue that's come up in ethics or eco-ethics, which is the question of polluting lakes with deities, right? And so you'll have conversations going on in India right now about eco-friendly deities, right? How to make a deity that can be disposed of in a fairly natural cyclic pattern. And this especially becomes a problem because in India people really get into their making icons. I went to a village this last summer in Kolkata, which was maybe several thousand square meters in size and full of these Durga deities, right? Because they're producing every deity for every Durga puja throughout the entire state, if not wider India and around the world. And some of these deities are 2 stories tall, and some of them are very small. And of course, they're being shipped around to a lot of different places. And so there's potentially quite a bit of accumulation that can occur there. So you want to use eco-friendly like paints and things like that, so you're not polluting your local environments. Anyways, and then we also have a different kind of iconography in which, or what we call iconodulatry, which is to say just idol worship, where you have more permanent installments, right? These are not seasonal deities. These are deities that are built to last, so to speak, right? So you have Radha Shama Sundar here, and I believe it's Lalita and Vishaka, who are the principal consorts of Krishna. They are all made of marble, right? And so these are intended to withstand the ecstatic vicissitudes of time, what I said. But you also have, for festivals, you have these smaller grass deities, which are generally named somewhat similar. I forget what these 2 are called. Yeah, it just might be like Radhe Sham or something like that. But they tend to have a name that's similar to the primary deities. So what you would do is, because these are so small, they're made of grass, so they can weather time as well. They can be washed frequently, and they can be brought out for festivals and brought on what we call parikram, or they can be what do they call it? How do you say it? What's that more English kind of vernacular way of saying that? Parikram.
Circumambulate.
What's that? Yeah, circumambulate. I was thinking of a
procession.
Procession. Thank you very much. That was the word I was looking for. But yeah, the circumambulation is the more critically technical, right? Because you circumambulate either a temple, right? So the small deities would actually do rounds about the big deity, right? And so that would be one of the big festival sort of festival events. But of course, these deities are built to last, right? And this is also kind of an eco-friendly response, right? Because you don't have to throw away. But at the same time, what you see here is something that's more maintenance-oriented, right? The people that maintain this temple do not do this seasonally, right? This is a daily event. They've invited these deities in to stay, right? They want them to stay. They're going to wake up in the morning. They're going to feed them sweets. They're going to sing sweet songs to them. They're going to feed them, breakfast. They're going to put them to rest. They're going to wake them up at noon and do another round of bhajan or singing and music and performance. They maybe give a lecture on theology or ethics or philosophy in front of them to an audience of practitioners or pilgrims, right? And then there's of course they are the center of a community, and they define its sort of religious activities in a very strong sense. So this is a very sort of when iconoclasm comes into this sort of environment, it's a little bit more tricky to deal with, right? Because these aren't intended to be disposed of so easily. These are considered to be, living as much as you and I. So that's one kind of extreme situation where politically more tangled ethical issues can arise. And of course, right off the beginning, I already signaled some images.